Good afternoon, everyone. I hope we are all comfortable despite the scorching heat outside. I am Riza Ana Alforja, FMDS Research Support Staff, and I will be your host for this afternoon. Welcome to the Let's Talk It Over on Futures Thinking for Agenda Setting webinar organized by the Diploma in Master of Research and Development Management and Master of Public Management programs of the Faculty of Management and Development Studies, and in partnership with the University of the Philippines National College of Public Administration and Governance Futures Lab. This Let's Talk It Over seminar series is a regular event of FMDS and is under our faculty's Community Inclusivity, Digital Transformation and Acceleration Towards Sustainability or CIDAS program, which is the intersection of instruction, public service, and research trust of FMDS. We are currently live via Zoom, the UPOU Network's Facebook page, the UPOU Network's website, and the UPOU YouTube channel. We have a few reminders before we start. You may already begin preparing your questions while listening to the presentations. For our on-site participants, we have given you a piece of paper where you can write your questions. You may give this paper to any one of our facilitators wearing black, or you can also ask your question personally during the open forum. For question, kindly state your name first and your affiliation. Please be mindful of our cameras as we are streaming live. For our online participants, please leave your questions on the comment or chat box of your streaming platform. That's it for our reminders. To kick off this afternoon's event, let us all welcome the Dean of the Faculty of Management and Development Studies, UP Open University, Dr. Joanne Viserano, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Raisa. Sorry. Isang maalab at mapagpalayang araw sa ating lahat. Before I start, please allow me to greet our esteemed resource persons, Dr. Ted Fuller and Dr. Reginald Ugadan, who are joining us via Zoom, and of course, Dr. Leo Mendel Rosario, who is here physically at the UP Open University headquarters. So welcome everyone sa UPOU. It is my privilege to welcome everyone and to formally open the program of today's Let's Talk It Over series entitled Futures Thinking for Agenda Setting. The Let's Talk It Over, or LTIO series, has been a platform of knowledge dissemination and community engagement, exemplifying FMDS dedication in making education open and accessible to all. As the Faculty of Study, which is composed of a collective of various disciplines spanning from the health to the environment, to management, and to the development fields, FMDS deals with policies, programs, and development concerns related to environment and natural resources management, land valuation, research and development, nursing, international health, social work, public management, entrepreneurship, and sustainability studies. And through the LTIO, FMDS is able to maximize the affordances of technology to bridge the gap between knowledge and those who seek it. This hybrid seminar is a testament to our commitment to inclusivity as we bring together both our physical and virtual communities to engage in meaningful conversation that transcend geographical boundaries. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, serve as our source of inspiration, and through initiatives like LTIO, we aim to empower both the general public and our FMDS students to contribute meaningfully to these global initiatives and objectives. We live in an era marked by rapid changes and complex challenges, and the ability to anticipate and shape the future is more crucial than ever. Thinking offers us a framework to explore multiple possible futures, helping us to navigate uncertainty, anticipate, and prepare for multiple future scenarios that will allow us to make more informed decisions today that will impact our world tomorrow. And as we face daily uncertainties, and regardless of our line of work, be it in public or private sector, strategic foresight becomes an indispensable tool, enabling policymakers and organizational leaders to identify risks and opportunities in future undertakings. We at the UPOU as an academe, we share common interests in exploring various approaches towards responsive and resilient agenda setting for respective organizations. And I believe that one good example that our participants can learn from this LTIO is how organizations can formulate the roadmaps of their programs and projects by integrating futures thinking and agenda setting. By thinking about multiple futures, we can establish principles for understanding complexity, building resilience, and setting strategic directions. Applying strategic foresight and futures thinking is crucial for capacity building and ensuring readiness of organizations for future challenges. And as we start today's session, I encourage each one of you to think critically about how futures thinking can be integrated into your areas of work or study. Whether you are a policymaker, a student, or a professional in another field, the tools and insights from today's discussions can equip you to contribute to a future that is not only possible but preferable. Once again, welcome to the LTIO Series Hybrid Seminar. Let's engage, learn, and inspire each other as we explore sustainable solutions for different scenarios and foster a culture of strategic foresight that empowers organizations and democratizes the process of agenda setting. Thank you very much and have a lovely day ahead, everyone.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Now, to get the ball rolling for this afternoon's discussion, I am thrilled to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Reginald G. Ugadan is an assistant professor at the University of the Philippines National College of Public Administration and Governance, or NCPAG, in Quezon City. With an extensive background in public administration, he earned his master's and doctorate from the Graduate School of Governance at Sungkyunkwan University, Seoul, Korea. Currently, he serves as the program director of the Governance Futures Lab at UP NCPAG. He leads research initiatives in various areas including public management, disaster management, global and local governance, e-government and e-policy, strategic foresight, and performance management systems in the Philippine local government. He has also served as the director and college secretary of the UP NCPAG Center for Public Administration and Governance Education. His expertise in these areas has been recognized globally, with his works appearing in prominent publications such as the Philippine Journal of Public Administration, International Journal of Policy Studies, International Journal of Public Sector Management, Public Performance Management Review, American Review of Public Administration, Asian Review of Public Administration, Modern Society and Public Administration, Public Personal Management, and Asia Pacific Social Science Review. Without further ado, let us all welcome and give a virtual round of applause to Dr. Ugadan.
Maraming salamat for that kind introduction. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. And first of all, before I'll talk about futures thinking for agenda setting or how we can integrate futures thinking and strategic foresight in agenda setting, let me just thank the University of the Philippines Open University Faculty of Management and Development Studies for this opportunity to collaborate with you in democratizing futures and foresight Philippines. My talk will be dealing with just for a moment. There you go. Okay. I'll be discussing to you how this futures and foresight can be applied in agenda setting. It will be a great structure, sana, no, if we have the discussion about what is this futures and foresight, but we'll try to bring in the discussion. Uh, what is this futures and foresight, or futures thinking and strategic foresight? So before that, these are just preliminaries. Let me just briefly introduce to you what is this Governance Features Lab that is currently at the University of the Philippines, the National College of Public Administration and Governance. It's just in its second year or more than 2 years already since we established this program at UPNC 5 through the help of the Senate, of course, through Senator Pia Cayetano, wherein she rules a fund for the establishment of this. What we're doing actually is that it's um, the, the governance features hub uh, wants to serve as a research and a think tank on public administration and governance, helping, of course, to integrate anticipatory innovative programs or strategies in the government. So we inject on futures and foresight research, capacity building, and also have been doing a lot of collaborations. So this is a very young team that we have here at UPNC 5. As you can see here, you can possibly see the orientation or the focus of the governance features lab, wherein we engage into futures and strategic foresight research. There's this we also engage in futures and foresight institutional capacity development, also on futures policy and focusing strategic partnership, and also on futures education and knowledge co-creation. So all these areas now are the main focus or activities of the governance features lab. Yep. So from its establishment, we already, as you can see, just by the numbers here, we were able to conduct capacity development or engage more than 2,000 participants in various programs. We already have this, and we have conducted 8 researches and continuously, of course, engaging in research. And we have also joined and organized conferences on futures and foresight. And this is where, as you can see in the map, where we have been as a governance futures lab. Of course, the very intention is that to democratize this futures and foresight. So just the partners. Now, if you are new into futures and foresight, let me just give you, of course, a brief talk about what is this futures thinking and strategic foresight. You've been hearing people say, or maybe experts in the field, saying futures thinking and strategic foresight, and sometimes they have this shortened expression on it. It's like futures and foresight. But what they are referring to is that they're saying, or they're actually referring to futures and foresight. Now, for us in the academy, maybe we can look at futures thinking as the theory and methods. It guides, of course, the application or the practical application of what we do in futures thinking, and that's, of course, that strategic foresight. So there is this theory, and also the methods that are attached to futures thinking, and the application or the act of doing futures thinking is strategic foresight. So I want just to give you an idea when we embark into futures and foresight, for policymakers or decision makers, or for those who want to be a scholar or practitioner of futures and foresight, what you're actually doing there is that you identify or you bring or you connect yourself to the environment, much more, of course, to the external environment or to the macro environment of a particular organization. If you are, of course, working, if you are to embrace or to integrate futures and foresight in your organization, the first thing is that for you really to connect to what's happening to the environment. You have to identify what are those emerging issues, trends, as well as driving forces that might affect the trajectory of your organization, or maybe, or looking at, of course, a particular focal issue that you wanted to focus in your organization. So the first thing there is that to identify what are those forces of change that can be categorized as emerging issues. Emerging issues are somewhat what we call as the weak signals. So these are things that are yet to mature. These are things that are yet to happen. But once it get mature, or once it mature, it can of course influence the trajectory, or might affect, of course, affect the direction of your organization. We look into trends because, of course, these are what's happening now, what we can observe, but you can possibly see how or feel, right, how it can impact or affect your organization. So different organizations look into this different forces of change. So where it comes into the uncertainties, their impact, whether they are relevant or not in your organization or in your particular focal issue, and whether or not they are controllable or you can possibly control them. So in futures and foresight, we negotiate uncertainties. We look into how different factors from the external environment might, or how uncertain or how they could possibly, if you can possibly look at the results or the changes or even the developments, or maybe the sources of information about those different factors. To articulate scenarios. One of the important things I would like to emphasize when we do futures and foresight is the scenario development. For me, I've been of course, for the establishment of the governance futures lab, there are lots of different scenario exercises that we conducted in different agencies. And then of course, we look at how the scenarios were developed. Of course, how we can scientifically or systematically develop different scenarios and take from those scenarios or based from those scenarios, we identify or develop different strategies. And from those scenarios as well, will we develop what are those preferred or shared vision or desired future. Of course, again, emphasizing the role of road participation. That's one important characteristic, of course, that we have to understand when we talk about futures and foresight. Uh, and introduction of innovation, because based from those different scenarios that can be a basis or that can be that can be the assortment evidence for us to look for strategies. We can possibly identify or bring different innovative policies or interventions that we can implement in our current or that we can implement at the present for us to achieve those or for us to move towards a desired future or a preferred future. And of course, that could possibly bring us to a more robust policies and strategies. I'll discuss later on how these features and foresight, for me, of course, on how it differs or how we can look at the difference of these features and foresight with traditional approaches. Right? But let me just give you, of course, for everyone here, maybe of course in the at UPOU as well as the participants here in Zoom, three pieces of foresight that we have to. It can be, of course, advisable or it's an easy way for us to understand foresight. So it's perspective because we look into different strategies or we work on future-oriented activities or future-oriented scenarios. Right? So it looks into it considers, of course, the conditions from the environment, those disruptions, right? And look into how these different emerging issues, trends, and driving forces, might develop and might um, or it can how they could possibly influence, of course, your focal issue or your organization if you are just to look for an organization. So it's perspective because, of course, as I've mentioned, it's decidedly future-oriented, wherein it probes or look into the impact of change, the shocks and disruptions on future realities. It's participatory. I have to emphasize this that in futures and foresight work or the development of those different scenarios, must avoid that group thinking, meaning that develop or those scenarios are supposed to be developed with all stakeholders or those that will be influenced by the scenarios. For example, you have to bring the people's perspective or maybe different stakeholders' perspective in the scenarios, and not just, of course, the perspective of the few, because there are also instances, of course, that scenarios are developed by just by the few, meaning, of course, they will develop the scenarios that will benefit them. Right? So it's very important for us to consider or bring the participatory perspective of futures and foresight. I want also to mention about it's policy related. Right? So foresight work or futures in foresight, is driven by the public leaders and, and the citizens, and it has to whatever results that it can bring. For example, from those scenarios, the strategies or policies must have to be developed towards that preferred or maybe avoiding a disowned or rejected scenario. With this, of course, you can possibly just have a quick understanding or an appreciation, of what is this futures and foresight all about. Now, I want you to look at this framework. This is a framework by Voros, wherein he presented, for us to easily understand also foresight or strategic foresight. Please understand, or just for you, when I say strategic foresight or foresight, I'm referring, of course, to futures and foresight. Now, in this foresight framework, you can see here the inputs. Now, maybe we can appreciate later on when we say inputs, these are things that are happening in the external environment. No, and from this inputs, it should go through the process of this foresight. And according to this example or a framework here, that foresight goes through the process of analysis, interpretation, and prospection. When you say analysis, you have to look at from that external environment or from that condition, what seems to be happening. It's just like telling us or giving us an idea what seems to be happening. When you go down to that interpretation, a foresight practitioner will look into or to understand deeper what's really happening. So it's looking or understanding that problem or that issue. And then in prospection, this is where we do the scenarios where we determine what might happen. Right? So the foresight process, as you can see here, right, from a condition or from a phenomenon, from this environment as an input, maybe that's a weak signal, or maybe that's a trend, or maybe that's a driving force. You understand, you analyze it, you do some interpretation, you understand or try to look at what might happen or what are the possible scenarios. And then from there, from that foresight, the result of foresight process, we'll go to these outputs that will give us an idea what might we need to do then. From what might happen or from that result of foresight, now we go down to outputs. And then from there, this is where we go to the strategies. What will we do? How will we do it? Now, if you're going this is of course the very ideal process or a process wherein a foresight must be considered in all aspects. For example, in planning or in policy making or in decision making. Now, this is what they call a reactive approach. If you are to look into this process or the whole foresight framework, it goes or it's telling you the very ideal process, of course, is supposed to that an organization must follow, or maybe a policymaker have to follow when we have to bring a more robust policies or strategies. Now, take a look at this framework. This is what they call a reactive approach. This is a firefighting mentality. This is where, of course, when you see there's an event or there is a phenomenon, you go down directly to strategy. This is, of course, where we identify different strategies or interventions right away. So as you can see here, we don't have the process of foresight, right? And of course, we don't have the process of outputs. It's just telling us that there's a fire, now you have to act on it. Right? For example, in the case of COVID-19, that could possibly an event. Right? That could possibly an event since we are not prepared. We're not able to do foresight on that, and even the process of an ideal process, suppose of a foresight process. We went down directly to this strategy, and of course, this is a very dangerous approach. It can cause a lot. For example, lives or even, of course, resources for the government or for an organization. So from that event, COVID-19 as an example, we go down directly to strategy. Now, I want also to show to you that there is this also what they call a shallow foresight approach. wherein there is an event, maybe you have to understand what's happening there, right? The trends, but you failed to do interpretation as well as prospection. And then you went directly to this process or to the next level, and then you identified, of course, a strategy. Please take a look at this. In this foresight framework, you can see that the strategy is done by, of course, when strategy development and strategic planning. Right? So from this process, you can of course observe that from that event, you did complete the foresight process, and you went down directly to outputs and strategies. And I just want to emphasize again, this is a somewhat, for me, a risky approach for an organization because it will entail again a lot of resources or maybe investment to a particular um, intervention or maybe from this strategy that it may not be relevant or may not really address the root cause of the issue. Now, you also have this, what we call a narrow foresight approach, wherein again, from that event, you went down to the foresight, but you failed to complete the full process. Right? So from analysis, interpretation, and prospection, then but you were able to bring down again or go directly to outputs and strategies. Now, of course, this is something again that I'm telling that it's a risky approach. That it emphasizes, of course, the importance of bringing a careful foresight integration or the integration or the adoption of futures and foresight approaches in your organizational decision making or addressing, of course, issues that your organization may face in the future. Now, I want also to introduce to you, this is a strategic foresight framework that we've developed together with some colleagues at the UP and CPAG. Um, we also propose from following, of course, from that framework that we have to look into what's happening in the environment, and that in the foresight process we have to bring the experts, policymakers, and stakeholders so that we'll look into or we'll go through the process of foresight of analysis, interpretation, and prospection. And then you go down, of course, to outputs, wherein, of course, you determine how are you going to, or maybe what are those approaches or interventions that you have to carry out towards the preferred or desired future. And then you go down to this strategic management wherein you conduct strat planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. This is what I want to emphasize again, that in our practice, in current practice in different public organizations in the Philippines, they do strategic planning right away, right, without this foresight. And if you are to integrate futures and foresight in your strategic planning, the framework here could help you possibly, of course, see or maybe you can use, of course, this framework to guide your strat planning. That you have to understand, of course, what's happening in your environment. You do an analysis, you do a deep interpretation, understanding of that problem. You develop those different scenarios. From those different scenarios, now you identify, you start planning, right, for maybe identify different interventions or strategies that you have to employ in a given time horizon. Based, of course, from your scenarios, you implement them and you monitor and evaluate them. You also emphasize here that the whole um, foresight framework was enveloped by frenetic leadership, of course, bringing public value, the conditions of the environment. This is, of course, the source of the inputs. We also emphasize the knowledge co-creation and the intergenerational equity. So through this framework, you can possibly adopt it in different organizations. Maybe if you are to develop different strategies, much more, of course, as I mentioned a while ago, if you are to embark into a strategic planning for your organization. Right? I can share to you a lot of maybe experiences about how different organizations in national government agencies, in higher education institutions, in local government units, and other even non-governmental organizations, um, they integrated for features and foresight in their strategic planning. So in this way, it will avoid that firefighting mentality, or it will avoid that business as usual process of doing things in the organization, considering, of course, the disruptions or complexity of the external environment. Now, since a discussion that I've prepared for today is that something to do, of course, for our for those who are in the government or for those who are engaged in policy making, and let me just discuss to you how we can possibly, of course, integrate or bring futures and foresight in the policy making process. Now, let me discuss, of course, important attributes first of public policy. Of course, not only in the Philippines, but we can also look at how public policy is being defined or discussed in different jurisdictions or in different contexts. We define, of course, public policy or policy, being interpreted as implemented, of course, by public and private actors to have may have different interpretations of the problems, the solutions, and also their motivations. Right? Policy, as we all know, of course, in the public policy arena, it's made, of course, not to address a problem or to address or to as a response to a problem that requires attention. Right? And also, public policies or policies are, of course, ultimately made by the government. Uh, Even, of course, the ideas or the proposals or propositions about these policies are outside or that came from outside or from outside the government, of course, through the interaction of government and non-governmental actors. Now, of course, the most um, my favorite, if I may say, and when we define what is this public policy, is that it is what the government chooses to do or not to do. Please remember that. Now, when we talk about this policy, it's not only those that the government is actually doing or the government opted to do, but also when the government chooses not to do anything about a particular problem or phenomenon. That's also that, of course, is also a policy. Right? Now, as you can see here, of course, policy is made in response again, and of course, it's made on behalf of the public. So that is very critical there. Right? So policies are made on behalf of the public, of course, with that representative bureaucracy, or in the Philippines, we can treat it, of course, this policy on this regard. Right? Now, let me also differentiate to you before we embark deeply into futures and foresight and public policy making or the policy making process. Of course, we understand that this policy making, it involves a broader process of decision making, right? And and of course, it is implemented within the political and institutional context in the country. And public and policy analysis, I also want to include, of course, the discussion about policy analysis, because you can possibly look at later on how this futures and foresight or the field of futures are related to this policy making as well as the policy analysis. So policy analysis, it supports this policy making, and wherein it clarifies the problem, it identifies policy alternatives or solutions, and also looks into the trade-offs among those, among, of course, the different consequences of policies. Now, please take a look at this illustration, wherein currently, as you can see, there seems to be a gap between the futures, of course, knowing the future or how the future would look like, and acting toward in policy making. So there is a somewhat what we call a mismatch between anticipatory, of course, knowledge from the futures and foresight or futures field and the uptake of this knowledge. As you can see, there's a challenge to improve the link between policy analysis and futures field or futures and foresight, because there's really a weak link in practice. And also, you can see there's a moderate link between policy making to this with the futures field. And as you can see here, the policy making and policy analysis in every jurisdiction and in every context, you can see that there's a strong link. So for those who embark, of course, in futures and foresight or in policy making or policy analysis, you can possibly agree, that there is really a strong link, because this is how we were taught. Of course, if you are in a public policy school, just like, for example, in NC5, we emphasize really the connection between this policy making and policy analysis. Right? However, we were able, of course, to, for me, at least for me, I can confirm that there's a moderate link and as well a weak link, because futures and foresight, rarely considered in the policy making and in the policy making process. Now, if you have to look into, of course, understanding how we can integrate futures and foresight in in policy making, is that we can possibly look at the characteristics of uncertainties in policy. So there are different uncertainties in different levels. So as you can see here, level one, of course, that's the lower level here. There could be there's a clear enough future, for example, right? A particular phenomenon or issue that a public policy would like to address, you can possibly, of course, predict, how the future would look like with that. So that is a level one um, uncertainty in policy. Level two, there could be different alternative futures, of course, based on probabilities. In level three, you can possibly see a limited, bounded set of plausible futures, because, of course, maybe because of uncertainty or ambiguity, and of course, the vocalness of the environment seems to be very evident in a particular phenomenon as well as to an identified policy, but that could lead to a level three uncertainty. And in a level four, there is an unlimited, unbounded set of possible futures. Meaning, looking at these different policies or uncertainty in policy, we can, we can see how, right, the government or policymakers could react or maybe identify strategies or policies to address a particular problem. Now, I want you to look at this table here, where, of course, as we mentioned a while ago, the type of uncertainty and the context, right? The level one, two, three. As you can see here, it's like the type of policy that you can, of course, in the level one is an optimal policy, wherein you can just easily forecast the future. I hope our colleagues also later on, Dr. Fuller might be able to discuss as well, what is the difference between this forecast and foresight. But I just want to give you an idea, when you forecast, there seems to be a clear future already, right? And of course, you can see here the risk as well as, of course, the level, the risk-based policy, static, robust policy, and adaptive policy. Right? I want you to go back also, to maybe if you have studied for policy making process, there is this different phases there, right? The problem formation, wherein I just want to emphasize on what is the action or how the government should really look into this. So the government in this policy making process, the problem formation, we're getting, of course, the government to see the problem, right? So that's the common sense of that. In stage two, we're in the policy agenda, where, of course, this, you can see here, the common sense of this stage is that getting the government to begin to act on the problem. The stage three, the policy formulation, is the government's proposed solution to the problem, right? And then stage four, policy adoption. This is where getting the government to accept a particular solution to the problem, identify, of course, policies, and then policy implementation. This is where the government now, the government's applying, of course, the identified policy, and of course, the policy evaluation, wherein we look at did the policy work. Now, if you are to observe this process, I could possibly, for me, you can see that how reactive the approach that we have in policy making process. So there's a problem first, you wait for the problem, and then you address the problem. That's, of course, a traditional approach in policy making. But later on, maybe you will also learn that, in integrating, of course, futures and foresight, is that we don't have the problem yet, but looking at the trends or the issues, we will address the possible or future problem by developing those different scenarios, and then identify interventions that we can apply or we can implement in the present. Right?
Now, if this is the traditional approach in policy making process, there's also a process that I would like you to look at. There's this what we call a framework foresight by Heinz, wherein this is popularly utilized in different research or different activities that might require the integration of futures and foresight. I just want you to look at this because here in a framework foresight, you identify, you frame, of course, what's the problem. You identify what's your focal issue. And then identifying, of course, the focal issues like identifying what is the subject of your futures and foresight work. Wherein you determine what is the time horizon, what is the geographical boundary, who are the stakeholders. Mostly in our workshop, we also include what are those SDGs that will directly benefit to this Futures and Foresight project. So in the framing process, we integrate, of course, the identification of SDGs. Right? From framing, you go to scanning. It's more of collecting information or determining what are those forces of change. I'm referring, of course, to emerging issues, to trends, as well as to driving forces. After looking at those forces of change from your external environment, now you do the futuring, wherein you identify or determine what is the business as usual future, maybe, of course, depending on your time horizon, the baseline alternative scenarios of the focal issue. Then from that futuring, you do visioning, where you determine what is the um, what is your preferred scenario or what is your preferred future. Right? From that preferred future, now you look into different strategies. This is where the designing phase comes in. You develop prototypes, strategies, or plans in achieving, of course, the vision or preferred future. And then adapting, this is now the acting part of the process. Now, this is a futures and foresight process. I've been thinking, of course, on how we can integrate the two in the policymaking process. Right? For example, in framing and problem, of course, the problem formation here in the policymaking process, you can possibly integrate the framing process. And the policy agenda, the scanning is very critical in this stage. Of course, in the traditional policymaking process and the foresight process, now we can integrate this scanning. And also the policy formulation and futuring. Right? Wherein, of course, we can look into the policy formulation stage. We propose solutions. Solutions are developed, of course, to address the identified problems. This can be done, of course. For me, you can look at or view it via scenarios. And the designing stage, of course, you look at the commonality of the process of a policy making and a foresight, and also implementing or policy adoption and the policy evaluation. So I can see that there could possibly be a very good combination of the two. Now, let me just give you some cases that we're in on how, of course, futures and foresight is being adopted or integrated in the agenda setting. In South Korea, they have this process wherein, as you can see here, there is an institutional agenda or organizational agenda wherein they look into what are the future conflict, and also what are the future conflict issues, as well as considering, of course, the trend. So you can possibly, you see here, the process. For example, in identifying, determining the conflict, the future conflict, they identify what is that phenomenon or issue. They look at the status of that issue, and then they conducted, looking at, of course, the baseline information. They look into what are those relevant institutions and policies, and also integrate now the futures and foresight work here, wherein they do scenario planning, then also look into they use other um, futures and foresight tools like horizon scanning and coastal layered analysis, and they look at the stakeholders' stance and government's proactive, and then they come, of course, they look into the proactive management plan or strategic plan. So it's just a framework that how countries, of course, in Korea have utilized that. So this is just a framework wherein the current conflict, they determine what's the future conflict, and that leads to a conflict agenda or maybe a phenomenal agenda. And then they look at how this agenda setting, of course, reshape the future conflict, to bridge, of course, the future conflict and the conflict agenda. Of course, these are issues of phenomenon in in South Korea that are encountered by different agencies. So this is just an example. For example, in South Korea, they have KAIST. There is a foresight institution. They do this process and inform, of course, the different government, and then they start the planning. But of course, as you can see here, for me, it's a very logical process, or they use a logical framework towards futures and foresight. So this is also the process. Now, lastly, I want also to share to you. Maybe you have already encountered this futures and foresight project wherein they determine the futures of work and technology 2050. And the very issue that they have, or the problem, or that they want to address here is that the potential impacts of artificial intelligence. And they have, of course, they divided the artificial intelligence into three, and from ANI, AGI, and ASK, from narrow, general, and super intelligence. And the proponents of these scenarios is that the very objective is that for them to assess or to look into how might the future would look like, by 2050, once if this different artificial intelligence will develop, or it will, of course, be integrated in the society, or it can be used, of course, in different sectors in the society. So that's a very objective there. The data sources that they use for this futures and foresight work is that literature. They've interviewed 450 futurists, AI professionals from over 50 countries. And this is what I'm talking about. Now that in futures and foresight, you have to bring those different scenarios. Now from those scanning, now they were able to come up with different scenarios, and they just describe the scenarios as it's complicated, a mixed bag. That's a business as usual scenario. A future despair, meaning this is a rejected or disowned scenario. And if humans were free, it's a scenario that it's more of a preferred scenario. So they provided a narrative about those different scenarios that I cannot discuss now, but of course, I'll be sharing to you the material for your reference as well. So they describe the narratives of those different scenarios. Scenario two, this is the disowned scenario. And now they were able to come up also with a narrative about the preferred scenario. Now, from this preferred scenario, now they identify different strategies. Please remember, these are scenarios that might be, of course, an image or a condition by 2050. So that's how they created those scenarios. From there, they were able to identify 93 actions. They have identified actions that are grouped into 5 categories. So just maybe, since my time is almost done, but I just want you to, these are just examples. From that preferred scenario, they recommended these policy interventions or strategies so that different countries can adopt. For example, for us to go to that preferred scenario, government must establish a national independent technology forecasting and assessment agency to inform the legislative, judicial, and executive functions. So that's one recommendation. They also emphasize that the government, of course, and labor unions should cooperate to create a lifelong learning models. They also recommended study on how to prevent future conflict between technologically augmented humans via AI, and training programs also for politicians before governing, and include prototype governance methodologies. And by 2050, introduce a global system of resource sharing, all kinds. That's what, of course, the document is telling. That based, of course, from the scenarios, that we can possibly, of course, have these different strategies. I just extracted some of the strategies here, but of course you can look at them later on. They also recommend, of course, in education. Maybe just to give you, for example, they recommended that we should include futures in the curriculum for higher education institutions. Right? It's a scenario in 2050 for us to survive the scenarios, or to cope with the possible scenarios in the future. Currently, or in present, we can possibly include futures in the curriculum as we include history. So we should teach some alternative visions of the future, foresight, and the ability to assess potential futures. Last thing, maybe you can also look at this. In parallel to STEM or STEAM, create a hybrid system of self-paced, inquiry-based learning for self-actualization. And for faculty members or maybe for the academy, retrain teachers as coaches using new AI tools with students. And for the last part of my talk, I just want, of course, if you are interested of embarking into futures and foresight work, I think you have to look at different tools or learn more about the futures and foresight tools. So these are just a list of possible tools that you have to learn. In our workshops at the Governance Futures Lab, using, of course, the framework foresight of Heinz, that we have been introducing Futures Wheel, Environmental Horizon Scanning, the CLA, Futures Triangle, scenario development. We also do scenario immersion, backcasting, as well as emerging issues analysis. And of course, having this, of course, in your, if you are capable of doing this, you can start, of course, working um, or doing a futures and foresight project. It can be in the research, it can be, of course, in a strat planning or risk management initiatives for your organization. So with that, thank you very much, and of course, I'll be staying here for the Q&A. Maraming salamat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reginald. So, with that talk, we are used to the traditional planning process. And with Dr. Reginald's talk, we knew on applying the foresight methods to the traditional planning process, which serves as an opportunity for government to address key issues, whether it is on responsiveness to change or it is in terms of citizen-centered design. So thank you for that, Dr. Reginald. Moving on to our next speaker, we have Professor Ted Fuller, who is currently a professor of entrepreneurship and strategic foresight at the University of Lincoln and concurrent UNESCO chair on responsible foresight for sustainable development. Since 2008, he has occupied various leadership positions in the university, including the head of the business school and the chair of College of Social Science Committees. In 2015, he assumed his role as a full professor focusing on studies related to foresight, anticipation, and emergence. Also a prolific researcher, he currently serves as the editor in chief of Futures, the Journal of Policy, Planning, and Future Studies. Outside the academe, he has practiced entrepreneurship, starting his first business at 19. Without further ado, let us all welcome and give a virtual round of applause to Professor Fuller.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning. My apologies for being slightly late, some technical difficulties. I would like to, I will share my screen with you so you can see the PowerPoint presentation. I would just react to the presentation before me by Reginald, which I thought was extremely comprehensive, extremely knowledgeable, and really shows them really on top of this foresight process as part of policy. I thought it was excellent. So let me share my screen or a screen with you. This one, I think, probably be good. Okay, let's see, that's the right one. So if I may start this and just, oh, hang on. I don't think you're seeing the right one. My apologies. Let me stop that for a moment. Sorry for the long delay. I'm now sharing my screen, so that looks good. So let's talk it over. I think you'll find my presentation somewhat simpler than Reginald's, hopefully. But so in summary, I'll talk briefly about how we think about the future, why it's important, how it's possible to be done, strategic foresight as a continual process of becoming, not something you can do and leave behind. And thirdly, sustainable development goals as a way of framing the future. The first thing I should probably bring to attention is the theory that we all anticipate as living things, and that anticipations, it's existential, it's what we do. All living things anticipate. And in the sense that we react to our anticipation, what we think might happen in the future, it's causal. So ideas about the future are causal on the present. Sadly, the little GIF isn't working, which is a bit of a shame. Oh, there it goes. Yes, yeah. So it's what's the kitten? The kitten seems to be quite poor at anticipating, but in the longer term, of course, what it's really anticipating is the way that food moves and can be caught. So it's just a sort of pleasant intro to the idea. Pierre Wack talked about thinking about the future in terms of the gentle art of reperceiving, seeing the world differently, reperceiving, seeing different, where we've come from, where we are, where we would go to. The way of future thinking is somehow about reperceiving. It isn't about prediction. Future studies is the field that I belong to, and this talk comes from. And it really doesn't do crystal balls. It doesn't do predictions. It's about, as Reginald already said, it's about uncertainty and how we try to soften the uncertainty that we live in and surrounded by. So we don't do crystal balls. And as the famous nuclear scientist Niels Bohr said, there he is in that illustration there with Albert Einstein, the future prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. The future is contested, the future is uncertain. There are many possible futures, and that's what we deal with every day as futurists. Richard Slaughter put it like this in terms of our relationship with the future. We interpret the past and we anticipate the future. And so our present day knowledge is some kind of mixture, our present actions guided by our interpretations and by our anticipations. And this is what happens when we're thinking about the future, whether we do so, as it were, knowingly, explicitly, clearly, with particular methods, or whether we just dream. And I think a final really future studies 101 is the idea of possible alternative futures. There isn't one future because of human agency, because of the capability and the human capacity to change things. There are many possible futures. Every stepping point as it were, in the trajectory of life has alternative futures, and every decision we make takes us in a different path, and every decision that other people make have influence and effect on those paths. Hence uncertainty. And the more we do it, the more uncertainty there is. At the same time, futures thinking is emancipatory. Understanding that the future can be different from the present and that humans have collective and individual power to change it can be emancipatory. It can set us free from what we do today to articulate changes in the world, including power structures, what's taken as normal, how we enable the present to be reframed. And with that, agendas, actions, policies, decisions can have new meaning. And that's kind of the enterprise that the activities such as Reginald mentioned take place. That's the enterprise. Emancipatory. We're not locked into where we've been. Our futures are, we hope, open, albeit challenging at times, to say the least. So strategic foresight is to reduce this sense of uncertainty. Whether it reduces uncertainty or not, I don't think anyone can prove, but it certainly reduces our sense of uncertainty, gives us more confidence. And usually if we have more confidence in the way we do things, then we're more likely to succeed. So more confidence to make design and make plans, to make decisions, to develop contingencies in relation to possible changes over which we have little or no control. And that concept that organization, government, enterprises, various agents are situated in an environment which is changing. This is the sort of central concept of strategic foresight. The environment's changing, and strategic foresight is a capability to look ahead, to identify paths that navigate these uncertainties. And various tools and methods are used to do this, and Reginald listed pagefuls of tools and methods. Citizen participation is one such approach, and there are many other methods, but as he listed. And foresight is used synonymously with a forward view, looking forward. Richard Slaughter again, great futurist. Strategic foresight is the ability to create and maintain viable forward views and use these insights arising in organizationally useful ways. So that's a kind of sense of what strategic foresight is. And where forecasting might be about prediction within certain parameters, short term, where you're reasonably clear about the levels of risk. Uncertainty is different from risk. Uncertainty is immeasurable, unmeasurable. Risk is measurable. So when you're doing forecasting, you're effectively using measured risk as part of the parameter set. Foresight, pathfinding, investigation of evaluating probable or plausible futures. Future studies as a domain is a wider field, exploratory, generates new ideas, is more visionary, more open. So futures activities sit somewhere in this, within these three areas, depending on the level of uncertainty, depending on complexity of the environment, depending on what the agenda is. If it's about planning, or whether it's about the possibilities of different futures, or whether about existential threats and what might destroy humanity, which the answer to which is humanity, I think. But that's a whole different conversation. And the examples of the ways of thinking about the future, we create images of the future, pictures, stories, scenarios, predicting how the future might be. We might look at trends and how things are changing over time. Or maybe there are circular trends or linear trends. We might look for emerging issues, so-called weak signals, what's happening. We haven't barely noticeable changes, but suddenly those barely noticeable changes become very important indeed. We might think about wild cards, that is to say, as a metaphor, what could never happen, what would have a very, very small probability of happening, and yet, if it did happen, it would be quite serious. I think probably pandemics fall into that category, or they did. Oops, sorry, going backwards. Various models, anticipatory models, what if this, what if that, and scenarios, which are stories of coherent narratives about possible or probable or preferred and desired futures. So this is just a list. I think Reginald was more specific. There are lots of ways of going about this. So briefly, to kind of a triangle of this short presentation is about thinking about the future. That's what strategic foresight is, and how that connects to sustainable development. So here's a future studies or foresight report, 1972, from Donella Meadows, Dennis Meadows, Jorgen Randers, and William Behrens. And it's called The Limits to Growth, a report for the Club of Rome project on the predicament of mankind. We probably say human mankind now, which talked about exponential growth, growth of world systems, technology, and pointed out that there were limits, planetary limits to the growth. It had a mind-blowing worldwide impact in 9 million copies in 29 languages, and for all its flaws, sent a message about the threats of future life-sustaining capacities of the Earth that remain as valid today as it was 25 years ago. That was Wendell Bell writing in 2001, and I think if we went, 25 years from there, or 2 years from there, 23 years from there, to here, the situation has got worse, not better. It's more specific. It's more in our experiences now than it was 50 years ago. It's less of a weak signal, much more of an everyday reality, as you well know. And it just shows. Unfortunately, not enough people took notice of limits to growth to make a real difference. And again, that's another talk on why that's the case, but not for today. Simply the point is we've been thinking about these kind of things for a long time. And obviously the Brundtland report gave it a label. So the UN now, we're at 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, and those develop, the explication of those development goals, the setting of the agenda, which was done in a hugely participated process, is not necessarily with equal powers, I understand. Sustainable Development Goals is a reframing of our world and its future, in a kind of stating the basis for a desired future, a commonly desired future amongst many or most, if not all, nation states in the world. And a basis for a desired future which leaves no one behind. I won't elaborate the Sustainable Development Goals. Again, that's a talk, that's a book in itself. But they're there, and they are, it's a political narrative, but there are measures, around about 150 measures, not quite that number, but similar, for evaluating our progress, which is being done, and quite clearly our progress is insufficient. We're not meeting the goals that are set. But nevertheless, it's a reframing. That's the point of our future. And it has brought about action and policies. And it's something we can't let go of now. The exponential change in levels of carbon dioxide in the Anthropocene is a real existential threat. They have this thing called the Great Acceleration, where all of Earth's systems and socioeconomic trends have this kind of hockey stick curve, which is exponential, which is going up rather drastically. And if we don't change business as usual, we won't be around to enjoy the fruits of Earth for too much longer. It's as simple as that, in my view. So, in my UNESCO chair at Lincoln, I have a number of colleagues who work with partners around the world, including the Philippines, Open University, and on various projects related to sustainable development. It might be about kind of women tech entrepreneurs, or it might be about food security in Africa, or it might be about technology education in Nigeria, or it might be about anti-corruption laws in India. There are various projects that address aspects of sustainable development, and each has a futures orientation. So my talk this morning is part of our relationship with the University of Philippines with respect to sustainable development and futures. So that's our work here. Here are some of my colleagues in the team. Magda here is working with the OU here in the Philippines. Various colleagues working in different countries. So in terms of agenda setting, which is the topic for the conference today, one important role of future studies is to identify how the world is framed, what kind of assumptions we make about the world, what kind of metaphors are dominant, what's the dominant narratives, and then it's possible to reframe and explore other possibilities. I just gave it an example, the way that sustainable development goals are reframed, the way that issues like zoonosis of pandemics and so on have been, and the Anthropocene has been reframed as a human problem, has been framed as an existential threat. And in a sense, reframing is an important part of future thinking. And this question about agenda setting, if you think you already know the agenda, if you think you know what your agenda is, you probably are not adequately using foresight to think about the future and to think about how you're framing the world and how you're framing your society and your role as government, or whatever it may be, with regards to, let's say, sustainable development in the future. If you're not using foresight, I would argue that the agenda is less informed. Think about that figure of 8 thing. Does the future play a part in the agendas of today? It's an open question. It's not a critique because I don't know your agendas, but the simple point is, if you think you already know the agenda, maybe you're not using foresight. So let me just remind you also about some idiocies of futures thinking. It's got to make people think. And a colleague of mine from Hawaii, Jim Data, has this fabulous aphorism: the most useful statement about the future should appear ridiculous. It's Jim Davis enjoying a glass of wine somewhere in Europe a few years ago. So the kind of current image of strategic foresight, where you have an environment and you have your organization in an environment, and you do an environmental analysis, natural physical environment, societal environment, task environment, all these kind of things, to see what changes there are and then plan a path through these changing environments. Yes, that's the way strategic foresight works. But we more and more, I think, need to think of ourselves as not kind of outside of that environment. We make that environment. We're inherently connected to that environment. Our human capital is inherently connected to natural capital, and natural capital is inherently connected to what we produce as capital, the goods and services and so on. So think about it as somehow the outside and the inside as erroneous framing. And I think it's so important that we start to reframe ourselves and the environment as part of one thing and not as something internal and external. So this is my view. My point for reframing today is about how you frame our activities within the environment and the environment within our activities, as rather than something external to that. We are part of nature, not separate from him. Natural capital stocks have reduced by 40% since 1992. We exacerbate the problem by protecting and prioritizing unsustainable economic activity. And the simple solution starts with understanding our economies are embedded within nature, not external to it. This is not me. This is Pathwan Dasgupta, Sir Pathwan Dasgupta, The Economics of Biodiversity, a review he did for the London the UK Treasury last 2021. And those were the conclusions. And he's a very renowned scientist, economist, development economist. You may have come across him. So he was quite inspiring in that work to me. So let's reframe our foresight for good. Foresight for good. The actions we have influence our future, that of others. We are entangled in relationships that shape our futures, that co-create future. So to what extent are we, can we be, should we be responsible for those futures we co-create? I think what Reginald did in his presentation is talk very much about our knowledge about futures, how we can know the future, what we can know, what we can't. We also have to think about our responsibilities and the anticipatory effects of what we do. So while this is about the security of our knowledge, the scenarios, the images, the trends, the horizon scanning, analysis, risk analysis are very important. We also need to be concerned about the security of our ethics, our governance, what the consequences are of what we do, the extent to which we allow people agency and freedom, how moral responsibility is carried within that, how our hopes and fears are affected by our views of the future, how we can encourage imagination, encourage aspiration, develop anticipation. All of these things are important in terms of our relationship with the future. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful.
Thank you, Professor Fuller. All right, since he has other important commitments, we're setting the next 10 minutes for a question and answer portion. And for our on site participants, you may use the mic to raise your questions. And for those in Zoom, please enter your question in the chat box. May we request everyone to initially include or introduce your name and affiliation before stating your questions. To moderate the question and answer portion, let me call on Ms. Priscilla Denise G. Pigao. She finished her Bachelor of Public Administration degree in UP NCPAG, and at present, she works as one of the program managers of GFL for the Futures and Foresight Institutional Capacity Development domain. Ms. Sess served as a program assistant under the GFL internship program and eventually becoming a program associate. During this time, she has had the opportunity to work with various government agencies, LGU, and other private institutions in the field of public administration and governance. Ms. Pigao also served as a research fellow, student research assistant of the UP Resilience Institute, or UPRI, working on a research project focused on green growth and sustainable development. She also spent a mid-year as an intern of Presidential Management Staff, or PMS. Here to moderate our Q&A portion, let us all give a virtual round of applause to Ms. Ces Pigao.
Wow. All right. So thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you once again, Professor Fuller, for your lecture a while ago. So Professor Fuller, actually most of our audience, they said in their registration that they're new to futures thinking, but they would like to know more about the principles and concepts of this. So others may wonder, why do we have to bother with futures thinking? And there are some that might say, we have so many problems right now. We have current problems. So how can we effectively prepare for the future while also addressing the current challenges of today? How can we balance that out, especially when it comes to gender setting? Oh, Professor Fuller, your mic, it's turned off.
Thank you. So I think that question is important, and it's something that decision makers have to live with every day. The amount they're going to invest in the future. I suppose one aspect. Well, firstly, the future is all we have, right? So if we don't act now for the future won't be how we want it. So it's important because it's uncertain, you don't really know where to invest your activities. So how you prioritize is an everyday challenge, and progress can be quite slow. But for me, I think that the thing is to be always be mindful of the future, and when it comes to decisions, to ask, well, we can spend this money or we can make this decision. To what extent is it irreversible? To what extent is it reversible? Irreversible decisions mean that you have just closed off a future in some way or another. Whereas if you think about how do we keep our options open? How do we keep our options, the future open to change? If this changes, are we still able to respond? So in a way, from a strategic point of view, you're continuously trying to protect your own future. It's not just about, well, if we make this investment, it will pay off, many years down the line, but we can't fix the roads because of that. That's the political judgment, and politicians every day are having to live with those kind of things. For me, it's about an attitude and the inclusion of the future in all thinking, and then ultimately some decision has to be made. But again, as to embody as many viewpoints as practical, so that you can see what the consequences might be, is such an important thing to do to get it right. So acting too quickly and too hastily, you're going to get things wrong. That's bad for you longer term. But it's an everyday issue. You're absolutely right to raise it.
Thank you for that, Professor Fuller. I think it's just about right because there's nowhere else that we can go. We can only go forward, we can't go back in time. So it's absolutely necessary and important to address our future. So we have a few questions already here in our Zoom Q&A. So first is from Jerome Castro. He's a student from the UPOU of the MRDM department. So his question is, how can we adopt the future's thinking in how we do research and development management?
Apply it. It's quite simple. um, Foresight has been a very regularly used activity in research policy. The kind of horizon scanning for emerging trends, for new technologies, the question of what are the consequences of new technology. I mean, AI is the big issue just at the moment. It's agenda setting, quite simply, in terms of research and development. It sets agendas, and it also helps you to storify, to make stories of, to give narratives to the research and studies that you're doing as to why they're important for the future. Are they protecting the future? Are they changing the future? So I think research is all about the future. Research is about making the future a different place, and it's absolutely central.
Thank you for that, Professor Fuller. And actually, in a lot of SUCs or state colleges and universities, they're already trying to employ futures thinking in their various researches so that they can improve how their university works. So thank you so much for that. And we have another question from Jane Reyes. They're from the UPLB College of Public Affairs and the FMBS UPOU. So why should we why should we be afraid of the future? Silly scare of climate change were slogans of Bjorn Lomborg as the 1970s Malthusian theory was disproven. So without too much ado with futures thinking, would it lead us to paralysis by analysis? That's the question. And there's a gamut of approaches, tools, and techniques in scenario building and strategic planning, which can confuse planners. So again, the question is, With too much ado with futures thinking, would this lead us to paralysis by analysis?
Oh, it may. Yes, yes. It depends on um, how you treat it. You know, what is it that you're using this futures for? You know, is it to do ultimate analysis, or is it to guide action? You know, if you have an action orientation, if you find it necessary, which normally it is, to act, um, and have the capacity to act, then you have to see the futures thinking and see the scenarios and see the planning as helpful, um, but uh, always finding a path. I think as I'm still thinking along the lines of irreversibility of decisions, maintaining contingencies and saying, well, we don't understand this, so we'll have contingencies, but we'll act, because action is action that makes the future. Anticipation is about being aware of changes and then acting. So think in an anticipatory way rather than a futures analysis way. Your futures analysis as part of making sense of the world, but you have to act. That's anticipation. You stop being anticipatory when you stop acting.
Thank you for that, Professor Fuller. So, as you mentioned a while ago, it's not exactly about knowing the future or making an exact picture of the future, but it's having an exploration of the future. So, thank you so much for that. And
Thank you.
have a lot of interest when it comes to futures thinking. So, in the Philippines, actually, we have a Committee on Sustainable Development Goals, Innovations, and Futures Thinking, or the SDGIFT, in the Senate. So, this is in the Senate in the Philippines. So, with the current progress of the world, do you have any tips or suggestions on what the committee should focus on?
Okay, so uh, I was recently at a conference in Uruguay where there were 70 different countries represented, some of which already had committees for the future, and some of which were developing committees for the future. And their role, these various institutional connections to governments, their role was, it varied from one country to another. Some had statutory power, a few had statutory power. I think generally the main consensus at the moment is that they should be informative. They should advise governments. They can be part of governments. They shouldn't have too much of a statutory power. They should really be about informing the decision makers, and trying to take their eyes off the short term, because politicians are very short term oriented for all the reasons that you implied in one of your questions. And the role of these committees is to take a longer term view, to take a wider view, to take a more exploratory view, and to feed that into the democratic process or the decision making process. I think there's some wariness about giving them too much power. Their power is through their knowledge and information and the way they can help politicians reframe the future for good, as it were.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Fuller. So there's not only a call to employ futures thinking in our government, but also maybe a call to make sure that we can balance out how much power they have when it comes to creating plans for the future. So thank you so much, Professor Fuller. I'm sure there are a lot more questions from our audience. However, that's the only amount of questions that we can accommodate for our question and answer portion this time.
Yes, well,
So for
thanks
now,
for inviting me.
yes, thank you so much, Professor Fuller. So for now, I'll be passing back the floor to our host, Miss Riza.
Thank you, Mrs. Again, let us all give a warm round of applause to Professor Fuller. Let us move on to our last presenter for this afternoon. He is currently the program chair and assistant professor at the Diploma in Master of Research and Development Management, or DMRDM program Assistant Professor Leo Mendel Rosario also teaches at the Diploma in Science Teaching and PhD in Education, major in Physics Education at the Faculty of Education at UPOU. He finished BS Applied Physics, MS Physics, and PhD Physics from the National Institute of Physics of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. As a second specialization in R&D and Innovation Management, he finished Diploma in Research and Development Management at the University of the Philippines Open University. He was also a recipient of the Leaders in Innovation Fellowship Program of the Royal Academy of Engineering of the United Kingdom and Asian Institute of Management. He also attended the OS for ASEAN short course on skills forecasting for the Fourth Industrial Revolution of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or DFAT, of Australia and Griffiths University. For his research, he has 17 international journal publications and 117 international and local conference presentations and 2 local patents. He has a research collaboration on futures thinking on the technology startup ecosystem with University of Lincoln from the United Kingdom and UNESCO Chair on Responsible Foresight for Sustainable Development. His current public service involves the capacity building of national government agencies on research agenda setting using futures thinking and the development of micro-credentials on skills forecasting and futures thinking. Let us all welcome Dr. Leo Mendel Rosario.
Good afternoon, everyone. My talk is entitled Building a Government Research Agenda from Futures Thinking. I am Layman Del Rosario from the Diploma in Master of Research and Development Management from the Faculty of Management and of Development Studies of the University of the Philippines Open University. So for my talk overview, my talk is divided into three parts. The first is about participatory foresight approach, and then it would be applied to research agenda setting, and I would briefly give you a demonstration of this application in a government agency. As mentioned before, strategic foresight is a tool that shapes our future by reducing the risks. So you can imagine a person going to a certain direction and there are multiple paths. That's an analogy of participatory foresight approach. So you have multiple futures and you choose the certain path that you would take on that future that you desire. And basically, this tool needs consultations from experts. These are the stakeholders who can share some of their experiences and their expertise to give some information on their possible insights on the different or on the multiple futures that exist. There are many methods on participatory foresight. Um, as seen in the figure, there are a lot, and a common method is literature review and expert panel. Others are future workshops, brainstorming, scenario building. There are also a lot of research journal publications on using participatory foresight approach in agenda setting, on policy development, on agenda for community development, and one of my research is on the formulation of research and development agenda for a higher education institution, specifically focused on aviation. In terms of the research agenda, it's actually a guide of the researches that would be done for the medium term or long term, for 3 years or 5 years. It can be a list of research areas, list of research topics. It would be a list of research areas for a funding agency because research proposals would be submitted and it would be prioritized if you are within the research area. For higher education institutions, some research and development office would ascribe to a research development agenda wherein not only the faculty research but also uh, the research funding that would be given to the school, to the faculty, would also should be aligned to that R&D agenda. And for our government, there is a harmonized national research and development agenda for 2022 to 2028 from the Department of Science and Technology. There are also research agenda from international organizations. Now, what's a simple way of using uh, the strategic foresight for research agenda setting? And it's seen in the figure. You scan in the current environment and try to determine different futures, no? Possible future, plausible future, probable future, and preferred future. The difference between possible, plausible, and probable is the degree of likelihood that that would happen. So possible is a chance, while probable is a future that that will seem to happen. And after imagining different multiple futures, you then provide an action and a strategy in order for you to be able to direct on a certain path, and that is your preferred future. From the study of Gerdsri et al. In 2022, they have shown for electric vehicles how the process of scenario planning for that technology. So they have identified or imagined different scenarios. Okay, good preferred scenario, an unpleasant scenario, and they were able to formulate actions that can navigate towards the preferred future and to avoid unpleasant future. And from these actions, they have uh, placed it in a timeline. So that is a roadmap, no? A timeline for 3 years or 5 years, or even longer. As a case of strategic foresight for research agenda setting, uh, I and Assistant Professor Lee and Angelico De Pante were invited for a research agenda workshop in Marina. That's part of Department of Transportation. It was held in December 5 to 7, 2023. So I would be sharing how Marina used strategic foresight in the development of their R&D agenda. So Marina is or Maritime Industry Authority is a regulatory body for the maritime industry with a mission statement of leading a progressive maritime administration that ensures safety and security of life and property at sea, protection of marine environment, and global competitiveness of Filipino maritime workforce. So they've tasked us to help them develop a research and development agenda towards this focus on regulation and policy for the maritime industry. And we have used and we have taught uh, strategic foresight or futures thinking to develop their R&D agenda. But in this presentation, I would only show some preliminary uh, outputs of what they have done. But they are still continuing on developing and finalizing their R&D agenda. So we've asked them what type of R&D agenda would they be doing? So in terms of scope, would it be on the RDD, Research and Development Division of Marina, whether it's a bigger office, the standard training certification and watchkeeping, wherein it involves 3 more divisions, or a national scope for the research agenda for the maritime education, training, and regulation of the country. So they have chosen an office, which is the Marina STCW. Okay, next slide, please. Wait for a few minutes. Okay, so here are the different divisions of the Marina Standard of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping Office. So they have the Quality Management Division, They have the surveillance division and the monitoring division. And our strategy or structure is to develop agenda for each division that we would consolidate for the office of STCW. So there are different elements in the R&D agenda that we have considered. First, of course, is their needs analysis, their current needs, the current needs on STCW, then also futures thinking, uh, research documents about the trends on the maritime industry, and the development agenda from Marina and other national government agencies. So we have consulted, their personnel, but they should also consult industry partners as well. So the process of research agenda setting for this purpose is to get an initial research agenda per division. And then per division, from a list of research agenda, we would use thematic analysis to get the common themes or priority research areas for that division. And then we will have a final division research agenda. And we would apply, again, thematic analysis of all the research agenda of the three divisions to get a research agenda for the office of STCW. After which, this research agenda of the office would undergo a management review, and then that would be the final R&D agenda. So as you can see, this is a tedious process of research agenda setting. So for the futures thinking, this is a sample of scenario analysis wherein one of the groups in Marina identified key drivers, no, which is AI in maritime industry and education, and the other is gender equality. And they have identified or imagined a plausible future, alternative future, preferred future, and feared future according to these drivers. And we can look at the preferred future, which encompasses AI in maritime, industry and education, as well as gender equality. Their preferred future is the integration of advanced technologies and automation in the maritime sector that may reduce some of the physical barriers traditionally associated with certain roles, making it more accessible for individuals regardless of gender. So this, from the prepared future, they would be determining some action needed and some strategies to be able for them to go to that future using researches that can help them be informed and on terms of regulation and in terms of policy for Marina. As you can see here, uh, the four elements for the R&D agenda, as I've mentioned before, is their needs analysis or their current needs, after which using future analysis and thematic analysis, we have identified four areas of research, which is on fourth IR, fourth industrial revolution, digitalization, green industry, and global seafarers. Then we also considered expert documents, no? Trends in the maritime industry, and lastly, we've also considered maritime agendas coming from the Maritime Industry Development Plan for 2019 to 2028 of Marina, the research agenda of the International Maritime Organization or IMO, and as well as the DOST R&D agenda, which is the Harmonized National Research and Development Agenda for 2022 to 2028. Now, from these four, we would apply thematic analysis to consolidate different research topics and research areas. And after which we need to prioritize which research areas would be doable for Marina. So these are other information of the Maritime Industry Development Plan, MIDP for 2028. And these are the overall plan outcomes that need to be considered in the R&D agenda. There should be researches that would talk about uh, ways, no, or actions towards increased employability of seafarers, digitalization of transactions, and efficient governance in Marina. Besides that, there is also something called as MFO. All the government agencies have MFO, or major final outputs. These are actually the targets of agencies that contribute that result from government projects and programs that contribute to the national development agenda. In the case of Marina, there are two MFOs, policy and regulation. And we would try to determine researches from those four elements I've shown before in terms of policy and regulation. And this is the matrix that we have used. Okay? So we would identify their current needs in terms of policy, MFO1, and in terms of regulatory, in terms of MFO2. From the futures needs or scenario analysis, we have identified four areas: 4IR, digitalization, green maritime industry, and globally preferred Filipino seafarers. So they need to determine researches in terms of policy or policy research and regulatory. After which, we need to consider local and international researches in terms of recent trends on policy and regulation. Besides that, and lastly, the fourth element is the maritime industry agenda from the Marina agenda, International Maritime Organization agenda, and DOST in terms of maritime areas. So from this matrix, the focus again, no, we have infused MFO1 and MFO2, policy and and regulatory researches. And here is a sample of the division research targets. Remember, there are three divisions, and one of the divisions tried to fill up this matrix in terms of their needs in policy research and regulatory research, and in terms of the future research needs, as well as the uh, maritime industry agenda. I would not dwell into the details of this, but what is important is integrating the MFOs of the government agency into the elements of the R&D agenda. And as you can see, one element is the scenario analysis from strategic foresight or futures thinking. Okay, so they're considering the current, the future needs, as well as the trends and the future plans or priorities of their agency. Now, from the matrix, no, that we have that they have filled up, we use thematic analysis and some content analysis to determine possible research areas. And the research and development division identified three: policy review, digital transformation, and open and distance e-learning integration. Then I'll just mention one of the proposed researches for each. No, for policy review, they identified analyzing and mitigating non-appearances of trainees in maritime training institutions. No, they need to create a policy for that. For digital transformation, they would like to do research on feasibility study on the development of monitoring systems for maritime education, training, and assessment. For ODEL integration, they have identified capacity building, no, for the surveillance team to adapt to the future trends in training delivery. So this is a sample of R&D agenda, preliminary work on it. And from the areas that have been identified by the Research and Development Division of Marina, we try to check whether these areas align with the Marina agenda for 2024 to 2028. So for the policy review, it aligns with the increased employability of the seafarers as well as efficient governance. For digital transformation, it aligns with collaboration between and among private and public entities on digitalization and innovation across the maritime supply chain and efficient governance. For the ODEL integration, it aligns similar to the policy review, which is increased employability of seafarers and efficient governance. So in this, this is actually a check in the end whether the proposed R&D agenda aligns to the agenda of the organization or institution. Now, from this R&D agenda, which is an initial R&D agenda, how do we make a roadmap? So uh, the groups brainstorm again on the different actions and different timelines that need to be done in order to answer the R&D agenda that was developed for the office. And they were creative, no? So uh, my partner in the training, assistant professor Lian Angelico Dipante, have encouraged them to have a branding of their R&D agenda. So one of the divisions thought of do Timon, because Timon is a Tagalog for the steering wheel of a ship, no? But it stands for an acronym. So they're very creative and they're more inspired on the developing the R&D agenda. So Butemon means digitalization of transaction and information of marina services offered nationwide. So it's quite creative. And they tried to formulate a 3-year timeline for the researches. Wherein for the 2024 it's a baseline data gathering. For 2025 it's they would try to design and develop the systems for DTMON, and 2026 is the full implementation. Although this is a rough timeline, more details are needed for this, like budget, manpower, collaboration. Okay, it should be part of the roadmap. That's all. Thank you very much for listening.
All right. Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you very much, Doc Leo. That concludes our presentations, and we are fortunate enough to hear about the application of strategic processes of research agenda setting in the Philippine setting, particularly in Marina or the Maritime Industry Authority here in the Philippines. And now we are opening the floor for questions and discussions. Again, to remind everyone on site, we have distributed small slips of paper for you to write your questions, or you may also approach the microphone. For those online, enter your questions in the chat or comment box of your streaming platforms. To moderate the question and answer portion, let me call on again Miss Cess.
Yeah, so hello everyone once again. So we'd like to welcome again Dr. or Prof. Ugadan and Prof. Rosario for our question and answer portion. All right. So our first question, and this is for both speakers. Various frameworks and tools were mentioned by both of you, which would mean that it takes time to learn everything there is to know about futures thinking and strategic foresight. Now, for our audience, do you have any tips on how we can get into or start learning about this? Because in some universities and some government agencies and other institutions, usually they have certificate courses, they have capacity building programs. But on an individual level, how can we get people to get into futures thinking?
Uh, Dr. Reggie, would you like to answer first?
Akala ko mo una siya na sa flavor. I just want to answer it this way lang then says. You know that the interest in futures and foresight, it's very recent lang actually, no, in um, if I'm going to I mean my experience on futures and foresight. And pati na rin siguro sa NCPAG, no, parang yung interest about futures and foresight um, came into being or mas nagkaroon ng ano, ng emphasis yung futures and foresight because of this pandemic. And for me as a researcher, as a scholar in public administration, public policy, I saw the value of this of this futures and foresight, the integration of it, you know, and also the interest of it.
Kung tatanungin mo ako about paano ba dapat, siguro yun, may trigger, no, kung bakit nagkaroon ng interest about it. And the trigger is that because of that condition, because of um, the approaches that we have might not really be, enough, that we have to embrace different lens or many approaches also in addressing, of course, issues of in the society. So as a researcher, nakita ko yung ano sa kanya, yung importance and also an opportunity na to really bring this social foresight. If you want to really get into this, no? Kasi yung ano kasi niya, no, it's a hot potato for me, no, yung social foresight. And for you to get into this really is that, of course, isang pamamaraan na nga ito, this like um, LTIO, uh, now UPO, learning from this. They are also in the Development Academy of the Philippines yata, in the Graduate School of Public Management and Development. They are offering also a Futures and Foresight, I mean certificate course on a Futures and Foresight. And lots of agencies are also into this. So parang nag-offer sila ng mga certificate courses. If you are in an academy or if you are a researcher, I think it's also a very good opportunity for you to learn the tools. Yung mga tools po na binanggit ko sa inyo kanina. Because in different workshops, in research, or I mentioned a while ago that um, if you want to integrate this videos of foresight in strategic planning or in research, you have to know siyempre mga basic tools ng futures and foresight. For me, I mentioned about of course, the scanning process. There's this what they call environmental and horizon scanning or emerging issues analysis, understanding, of course, the environment, understanding what are those critical factors that might influence the trajectory of particular organization or a particular focal issue. There are also, if you, kung kaya, no, after this session, you can learn, for example, about coastal layered analysis. It's a tool developed by Sohaili Inayatullah, a an authority in the field of futures and foresight. Futures Triangle, Futures Wheel, and among others. And even, of course, in scenario development tools. There are lots of scenario development tools. Meron yung 2x2 matrix. There's also a process approach in scenario development. Again, introduced by Suhail Natuyula and the wife of Suhail Inayatullah, si Ivana Milojevic. They developed that process model din ng pagde-develop ng mga scenarios. I started learning from that actually. Yung process niya wherein you have a what do you call this? A no change scenario. From that no change scenario, there's this marginal change to adaptive change to radical change. And from there, I also learned scenario archetypes and scenario matrix. And of course, you can, for example, you've been able with me, Professor Ted Fuller a while ago about that there's this also a scenario archetype by Dator. So learning those tools, might really will give you more interest into this and practice, of course, the use of those tools. Magandang ano din, if we can have a separate session discussing about research in futures and foresight, I think that's a very good area that we have to learn. Lalo na po yung mga researchers or those who are in the academy. Yun lang, Ses, for me.
Thank you so much, Professor Ogadan. So, as mentioned by Doc Reg, we can have a bunch of readings online. There are a multitude of tools which we can also view for our own understanding of futures thinking. Maybe that's how we can delve into futures thinking on an individual level. Maybe Professor Rosario would also like to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Ses. No? Um, the question is very interesting, but the motivation is more interesting because I believe in learning by doing. So if you, because from the registration link, we have learned that from the 400 plus participants, they are interested on futures thinking applied to strategic planning and policy development. No, so if your organization needs or would like to pursue agenda setting using futures thinking, then maybe you can contact the governance futures lab of Dr. Ogadan or UPOU. Then we can help your organization to craft your agendas. For the individual level, I'm quite happy to tell you that we would be pursuing a micro-credential and massive open online course on futures thinking in the coming months in collaboration with the Governance Futures Lab with Dr. Ogadan and Professor Ted Fuller. So the MOOCs on futures thinking is free. The micro-credential that can be credited to our degree programs here in UPOU might have a minimal fee. So I guess no. So um, uh, you wait for that in the coming months. But we are very enthusiastic because of the number of registered participants. So there is a real need for training or short course on futures thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rosario. So, it was quite exciting and it was quite nice to see that there are a lot of people interested in futures and foresight. And we're very thankful to the UPOU for partnering with the Governance Futures Lab. And one of the things that the Governance Futures Lab also really wants to do or wants to achieve is to democratize futures thinking in the Philippines. So, we're very excited for this engagement with UPOU. So maybe we can move on to the next three questions. So our first question is directed to Professor Ogadan. So futures thinking seems to be a very promising concept. So it can be applied in different things such as strategic planning, policy making, etc. Especially when it comes to agenda setting. However, to give us a better picture on its application, can you tell us exactly how different it is when you integrate futures and foresight in policy making and when you just do it the normal way? Perhaps you can give some concrete examples on how this is done when it comes to the government. Maybe baka may experience po kayo, Doc Reg, sa NGAs or LGUs, or maybe with the Governance Futures Lab.
Medyo madami eh. Madami mga experiences when it comes to governance features lab. Um, let me just tell you the difference lang muna. No? Kasi for me, I see of course the approaches, for example, in sort of planning or even in policy making or in the policy making process that I presented a while ago. Reactive yung approach talaga. No? So parang ganito yan. I want to quote a colleague here at UPNC5. He is actually a visiting professor from Taiwan when we discussed the difference between this approaches, the policy making, the traditional approach in policy making and the integration of futures and foresight. I mentioned a while ago, maganda po yung pagkakasabi niya, that when you talk about traditional policy making, you need to wait for the problem to arise and then you address the problem. That's a firefighting approach. But in futures and foresight, you don't wait for the problem, but about looking at the conditions. And then you develop those different scenarios. And from those different scenarios, you identify strategies that can be implemented or that can be in the form, of course, of strategies or policies. Na. So parang ganito po siya. No? Yung difference nito says, you and I know that, right? For me is that it's one, of course, difference on the approach is that those scenarios on how we identify those different scenarios, then how you use the scenarios. Parang ganito, understanding the future or para bang putting yourself into a scenario in the future. And then from that scenario, you think of what are those interventions or what are those policies that you have to implement sa ngayon so that we will be able to avoid a shadow scenario or the Jackson's or its own scenario or the business as usual scenario, or it will move us, of course, towards the third scenario. Isang halimbawa siguro is that I can tell you is that recently we did a scenario exploration activity for PubCore. You know the direction of PubCore. I cannot, of course, share the full document kasi it is yet to be presented to them. But one for me interesting na nagawa namin for Governance Futures Lab is that when we explore those different scenarios. It's a short-term scenario actually. Napaka short-term lang niya kasi it's just 5 years. We explored, of course, looking at the conditions of the gaming industry in globally, and also the gaming industry in the Philippines. We're able to identify what are those critical factors as pushes of the present towards a pull of the future. Of course, considering also some of the weights, we introduce or use the futures triangle there. So after getting those information, of course, having the key assumptions of those different conditions in the environment, we're able to create those different narratives. So with that, it's of course no, a different approach na kapag ito yung issue namin, ito yung gagawin namin. Ito yung problema na kinakarap namin, ito yung gagawin. You can see that pattern of a firefighting approach or a reactive approach. No? So dito, ang ginawa namin is that we did the key assumptions or we have the assumptions for those different conditions in the environment, and that based on those different key assumptions, we created those different narratives. And then from those narratives of the scenarios, we isolated or we separated the preferred scenario. We're in the from that preferred scenario, we identified now what are those strategies, so what are those policies that for how to implement or to adopt for that was of course being considered on their strat planning. One more example siguro is that you can see medyo gusto ko pa aralin yung Ambition 2040. You know, of course, you and I know that when the Ambition 2040 is a somewhat of course a direction for um, the ambition of the Philippines for there. And the document also have presented a lot of strategies, and they believe that it was of course created considering of course the different conditions. So yung difference lang niya, siguro ganun sa. But of course, we have a lot of examples. We also work with Transco and also with DILG, you know, and in other agencies that the process actually is that we have them frame. Just like Professor Tad Fuller have mentioned a while ago, it's very important. Framing is really, really critical. And that from that framing, we do that scanning. From that scanning, we do that futuring. From that futuring, we do that visioning to designing and to adapting. So we basically utilize a framework like I've introduced to you a while ago, the Heinz framework foresight. And we also utilize some scenario planning class. So it's really good also, I think, for you to know what are those maybe acceptable approaches or process in futures and foresight. No? Kasi baka ang mangyayari is that you intend or what your intention really is to bring or use futures and foresight, pero pagka siguro lalayo tayo dun sa process, baka babalik tayo dun sa traditional na approach. So what is missing for me is that yung rigorous na environmental scanning, and then yung pagde-develop ng mga different scenarios to foresight. And then from there, utilizing, of course, the results of the scenarios. Different approaches din pala, no, para mas ano ko lang po. No? When you have created those different scenarios, one approach is that, of course, in practice, what they do is that they isolate the preferred scenario and then develop strategies. Ganito they make ganitong approach then. Different scenarios, you identify those different strategies, and then you also look into whether how these different strategies or policies can survive those different scenarios. So considering pa rin no, yung buong mga scenarios. I would like to share a lot, pero siguro because of limited time, maybe we can have a separate session on that. And hopefully, of course, through this collaboration, we can you know, tell you those cases, at least for the cases or the practices also that we have here at the Governance Futures Lab na nag-insipay.
Thank you so much, Doc Reg. So as Doc Reg mentioned, the UPNC PAG-GFL has really gone through a lot of capacity development programs, and we've helped some government agencies develop their agendas or their strategic plans. So hopefully we could also do that for others, and we're very excited, as mentioned by Doc Reg, for this collaboration with the UPOU. So before we move to the next set of questions that were sent online, we do have some questions live on in the venue in UP Los Baños. So maybe we can get some from UPOU.
Yes, Mrs. This is actually from our YouTube viewer from the Professional Regional Training Center, and I am assuming that this question is for Doc Leo, asking that in the context of police training and education, who could become victims? What possible best curriculum to be introduced in the existing curriculum?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
In the context of police training and education, who could become victims? So, what are the possible or what is the best curriculum to be introduced in the existing curriculum? Maybe they are referring to the police training and education of the Professional Regional Training Center.
Um, that's a difficult question, especially if I don't have information on the present curriculum. But I think futures thinking can still be used on their agenda setting, on their projects and programs, and for the curriculum, actually, as mentioned by by Dr. Ogadan, no, he mentions that maybe futures thinking should be part of the courses in higher education institutions, no, because uh, our researchers and actors in different ecosystem need to prepare for the future. Uh, unfortunately, I cannot really answer comprehensively on that. But you may get in touch with me to have further discussion on that.
This is noted. Um, I'll get back the the question form to Mrs.
All right. So thank you so much for that. So we do have two additional questions. So one is for Professor Rosario. So futures thinking, although it has existed in different parts of the world for a long time, has only been recently introduced in the Philippines. So do you think it is important for schools, colleges, and universities to be integrating this in the research curriculum? So I think nasagot na rin naman tong question na to in to some degree. But just an additional point. If so, how early should we be teaching this? Or should futures thinking and strategic foresight be a whole curriculum altogether? Should it be integrated in a course, or maybe we should be offering a whole different program just on futures thinking?
That's a good question, no? But I think the current significance of futures thinking training mainly relies on the research and development managers or managers or directors of research offices because they are crafting their own R&D agendas. These are the researches that would be prioritized by faculty on the research as well as the thesis. And you need to consider, because I've done this in a higher education institution, I helped them formulate an R&D agenda, and we used participatory foresight approach. And in this, we look at the expert documents like trends in the aviation research and development, and we try to uh, somehow rationalize in the context of the Philippines, in the context of the Philippine aviation industry, what types of researches can be meaningful to HEIs and to be worked on by the faculty and students. So I think before we even get to the curriculum, uh, on educating our students, especially our researchers on their thesis, student researchers, I think primarily the management should consider training on futures thinking for their agenda setting. And I can only say for R&D offices because the usual approach in R&D agenda setting is to look at the current needs, but not projecting on the future needs of the Filipino people in terms of development and technologies needed. Um, so short answer again, we start with the R&D agenda of HEIs, and maybe also the extension agenda. Try to incorporate futures thinking into both, because if you want more impact, greater impact to the communities and greater impactful researches, then you should consider uh, thinking about the future to have a long-term and sustainable program. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Rosario. I think it's also important, like what was highlighted, that we start with the people on top. Start, for example, with the government and then top management. So in the university setting, in order to really help us attain or to really identify what research agenda is important or which ones to tackle, it's really the top management who needs first to be exposed to futures and foresight. So we have another question. So again, addressed to Professor Rosario. So again, from Jerome Castro from the UPOU MRDM. So thank you very much for both presentations. A question for Dr. Leo. May I ask how much time did Marina prepare for the workshop, and how long did it take the workshop to complete? More importantly, may I ask if this type of workshop can apply to MSME organizations, which may have a smaller R&D organizations?
Okay, that's a good question. I know Jerome personally, and thank you for attending this event. We had a very loaded 3-day training, because in the first day we trained them, or gave them an overview on futures thinking. The second day on research agenda setting, and the third day on road mapping. But we told them that these are just preliminary. uh, Whatever output we would have would be preliminary, and they need to continue developing their R&D agenda. What's the second question? Sorry, the first and second. Did I answer it already?
How, sorry,
I can repeat the
okay.
question.
Okay.
So, may I ask if this type of workshop can apply to MSME organizations, which may have a smaller R&D organization?
Okay, that's a very good question. No, I have some little knowledge on MSMEs, but I think majority of the MSMEs don't have any R&D units, unlike big companies. But as I mentioned before, maybe they can create a consortium and to have an R&D unit, or access different programs from the UST, like the Cradle program, which is a collaboration between the academe and industry for certain product development. Uh, if there is an R&D unit in the MSMEs, they can actually, one of the topics in our courses is uh, technology forecasting and technology futures analysis. So in that aspect, if the MSME is on technology development, they can use those two tools, technology forecasting and technology futures analysis, to project, okay, the development they need for a certain product, technological product. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc Leo, for answering that question. So we do have a comment in our chat box. The that that futures thinking has not been just introduced in the Philippines. So let's like to correct ourselves. Instead of saying just, maybe it was more recently mainstreamed into the Philippines, since it was stated that back in the 70s, Philippines already employed futures and foresight. So thank you so much for that correction. So so far we don't have any questions in the chat box. Maybe we can ask the audience. Do you have any other questions before we formally close our question and answer portion for our two speakers?
No more on our end. Mrs.
All right. So, thank you once again to the UPOU and, of course, to our two esteemed guests. And although Professor Fuller isn't with us anymore in our Zoom, we would like again to thank him. And hopefully, even though everyone has a lot more questions, or maybe you haven't yet articulated or formed the question in your heads, please feel free to contact us. You can contact the UPOU who organized this event. Thank you so much for that. And to the Governance Futures Lab as well. So, giving back the floor to the UPOU.
Thank you, Mrs. Let's give another warm round of applause for our speakers. And indeed, today has been very insightful. So before we end the program, thank you, Doc Leo. I would like to invite the speakers again for the awarding of certificates. May I also invite um, Dr. Assistant Professor Lloyd Simporio to award the certificates and tokens of appreciation to our speakers. Allow me to read the citation. The University of the Philippines Open University, Faculty of Management and Development Studies awards this certificate of appreciation to Professor Ted Fuller, Dr. Reginald Ugadan, and Dr. Leo Mendel Rosario for serving as resource speakers in the Let's Talk It Over series entitled Futures Thinking for Agenda Setting, held on April 30, 2024 at the UP Open University, Los Baños, Laguna, and live via Zoom. Given this 30th day of April 2024 at the UP Open University, signed by Dean Joanne V. Serrano. Once again, let us all give a warm round of applause to our speakers. Thank you, Doc Leo. To formally close the program, may we request the program chair of the Master of Public Management, Assistant Professor Lian Angelico Depante, to deliver his synthesis and closing remarks. Due to an equally important commitment, let's watch a pre-recorded video of Sir L.A.
Pong maalab na hapon po sa ating lahat. First and foremost, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our dear organizers and our esteemed speakers, Professor Fuller, Dr. Ugadan, and Dr. Rosario for leading such an enlightening discussion today. The insights we gained were truly invaluable, and as we convert this event into an open educational resource, we hope to empower even more learners with the power and potential of futures thinking, especially in the context of agenda setting. Today's LTIO event made it clear that our current practices fall short of what's needed for the future. Through discussions on futures thinking in general, at least theoretical, and its application to policy making, including a real world example from a public agency, our speakers illuminated a path towards enriching and reframing existing systems, or at least the way we think. This approach has the potential to create a more empowering and responsive environment for our communities, especially in the face of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world we live in. However, despite the surge in theoretical knowledge and innovative developments in, um, in developments, there remains a significant gap between planning and actualizing this knowledge into reality. In simpler terms, or in other words, we already have the knowledge, we have already developed tools for futures, but much remains to be done in terms of implementing it in actuality. As we move forward, we development scholars and workers must strive hard to bridge and lessen this implementation gap. As we conclude this event, that is our hope. We hope that we cooperate more, we consolidate our efforts so that we can minimize this gap. Again, maraming salamat po, padayon po sa ating lahat. And as always, our Filipino futurist reminds us, Hiraya Maniwari.
Thank you, Sir LA. And that concludes our program. Before we end, we are kindly asking everyone to accomplish the evaluation form currently flashed on your screens. Also, we are inviting everyone to the 41st Sustainable Shared Growth Seminar set to happen on May 8, 2024. The upcoming KKK seminar will discuss permaculture and transition towns and will feature talks by Mr. Kiyokazu Shidara and Dr. Jabez Joshua Flores. Next up, we are also inviting everyone to Let's Talk It Over seminar scheduled on May 10, 2024, and we'll discuss an industry approach to risk analysis for R&D projects. And that's it for our event invitations. To finally end our program, may I invite everyone via Zoom and those present here with us at the Audio Visual Room, UPOU, for a photo opportunity. Zoom participants, may we also request to open your camera. Again, to finally end our program, may we invite everyone via Zoom and those present here with us at the Audiovisual Room UPOU for a photo opportunity. Zoom participants, may we also request to open your cameras. Thank you.